Hi, everybody who's joined us so far. Thank you for joining us. We're going to give a couple more minutes for folks to join, and then we'll get started. I think I'm going to go ahead and get us started. There's almost 60 of us in the room, and we'll just get started and give folks a little bit more time to get in before we actually start the conversation. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Satyam, and I am going to be serving as the moderator for this conversation. I also am the Director of Development at Quality Care for Children, and I'm very honored to be participating in this conversation and facilitating and having this conversation with my guests today. So the topic for today's Georgia Parent Power webinar is Family Matters, Ending the Silence on Domestic Violence. And it's brought to you by our parent services team who are supporting us in this technical assistance on this particular call, as well as our corporate sponsor, Carter's, who is the largest branded marketer in North America for apparel that is exclusively for babies and young children. We've been partnering with each other for over 10 years, and their support has helped us bring events like this to the general public. If you are a parent or a family member seeking quality rated childcare and after school, please call us at 877 all GA kids, where you can talk to an actual human being, a referral specialist for free. And you can call from anywhere in Georgia, and we will be able to help you find a childcare, an aftercare, or summer program. You can also find us on qccga.org. You can also look up that information there, or on qualityrated.org. These are websites that you can go to. And if you come to our website, which is qccga.org, you can also, you now also have the capacity to talk to have a live chat with a person on our staff. This is a new feature we added recently, and we're very proud of it. And for those of you who are watching this as a recording on YouTube, please go ahead and like and subscribe this channel. If you're interested in learning more about what QCC does, please click on the notification bell. It's up here, is one somewhere here, so that you will be informed next time we upload another video. Okay, so a little bit about QCC. Our organization's mission is to create a system that equips families and child care providers with the knowledge and resources to nurture and educate Georgia's infant and young children. Okay, so today you'll be hearing from a panelist who will set the conversation by Jabril. Is there an issue? Okay, got it. So today we'll, set the conversation on what domestic violence is, how it plays out, what are some of the root causes of it, and what is our role. as we are in community with these individuals, both the victims as well as the perpetrators, as family members, as friends, as colleagues, employers, and community members. So there's a role for us as individuals to play in this issue. So we will talk about all of that. Now you may ask, why is QCC, an organization that squarely lives in the early education sector, talking about domestic violence, right? That's a great question, and I hope you will stick with us throughout the hour, and you will hear the answer there. But I also want to say, I've lost my spot here. Let me also briefly make the connection right now. We are in the age range of 0 to 5 years for the kids. That is when their brain networks are forming as the fastest, right? They are soaking up the environment that they are in. They're learning new things. They're responding to stimulus. They're looking at people. They are learning how to operate in this world by interacting with the adults that are in their lives, right? So we want to ensure that children are hearing lots of words, laughter, getting hugs, and learning the call and response. They're getting nutritious meals where they're setting up their taste for preferences for lives, right? But in a household where there's domestic violence, children are not experiencing these items that we just listed, right? And this has a profound impact on how they perceive themselves, their relationships, and their lifelong interactions throughout their lifetime, right? So as educators and caretakers, you on the call today are teaching children literally how to operate in the world and ensuring that their family is in a stable, loving, that they're growing up in a stable, loving family situation is one of the things. And today we're going to talk about what can we do if that is not the situation. Okay. All right. So now I think I can go ahead and introduce our panelists to you. The first person I'm going to introduce is Vanessa Wilkins. She has been working in the domestic violence sector for a very long time, 18 plus years, and currently she is the executive director of Tahiri Justice Center, it's a national organization and has an office in Atlanta. Tahiri delivers client-centered legal and social services to immigrant women and girls fleeing violence. Throughout her career, Vanessa has significantly expanded domestic violence services. She has directed the opening of a state-certified shelter. She has enhanced financial stability and implemented impactful prevention initiatives. And I also want to make my connection to Vanessa. Vanessa and I have worked in the same domestic violence community a long time ago, and I continue to partner with her in the community. So I'm very happy to have you here, Vanessa. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you for having me.
The other panelist that I want to introduce you to today is Dr. Marion Christopher Pugh. Dr. Pugh is a dedicated servant leader, accomplished educator, speaker, consultant, and an author who specializes in fostering cross-cultural understanding in academic and professional setting. Through manhood mindset consulting, he provides solution-based strategies for businesses, universities, schools, and family advocacy agencies, offering services in family structure counseling, coaching, and self-improvement. And Dr. Pugh is new to me, and I learned by watching his videos this morning that he has been a mediator and a facilitator and a liaison from a very young age. So Dr. Pugh, I welcome you. And in addition to speaking from your experience as a, servant leader and a facilitator, I hope you will also bring your experience as a child experiencing some of these issues we're going to talk about today. Okay.
Will do. Thank you.
So just a brief note about how we're going to structure this conversation is, first, I'm going to ask some basic questions to the panelists to just set the conversation about what is domestic violence. And then we're going to have a discussion based on questions that you all have provided, you all submitted during the time of registration. and we will take those questions up. And time permitting, we will take up questions that you share during the live session. When you submit your questions, please be sure to use the Q&A function and not the chat function. Okay. All right. So I'm now to my first question. And Vanessa, I'm going to start off with you. What is the definition of domestic violence, and in what ways does it appear in various forms and contexts?
Sure. So domestic violence is a really complex topic, but basically what it is, it's a pattern of abusive behavior that it's in any relationship that's used by one person to gain or maintain power and control over another.
Dr. Pugh, would you like to add to it?
Yes, thank you for the question. Basically, domestic violence begins with a violation. A lot of people may not know that and kind of picture that. Usually the violence, and just what Ms. Wilkins just Stephanie is telling us, is that when violence comes about, there's usually a level of disrespect that was experienced that went unnoticed or uncommunicated. And then what I found out, when a lot of people are silent about being violated, the violence is literally an outward expression through their body. It's literally a body language when people refuse to use the verbal language of communicating that something has happened, right? So just to complement what she just said, is that a lot of violence happens when people stop talking. That's why I love this topic so much, is because in the silence, that's what really causes the violence, when people stop communicating. So.
And I think I want to point out, like, one key aspect in that is that and in relationships, there's always give and take and, up and down, but the defining feature of a domestic violence relationship is one person has power that they use to control the other person, and the person who is experiencing the violence, their world shrinks as a result, right? So that's, I think, is a defining factor that we need to kind of keep in mind as we go along. Thank you for the responses. Before I ask you what is the cause of domestic violence, I want to take a minute to say what are some of the things that are not the cause of domestic violence. And I think because of how we interact with people in our own lives, we come up with assumptions that if you lack education, if you're not highly educated, that's the reason why you're doing all this, abusing somebody. If they think that, people also think that, lack of wealth or lack of resources is a reason why, domestic violence happens. Money is a trigger, but it's not a cause of domestic violence. And then also a lot of times people make excuses for cultures, right? They'll say, oh, like, in this culture, it might be accepted. Like, that's how they do it in this culture. And that also is an excuse, and it's not a cause. And that race or gender or sexual orientation is also not a cause, right? So I hope I kind of broke some of the assumptions that people were holding, but I really would like to ask Vanessa and Dr. Pugh to talk about what are the causes of domestic violence.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Satyam, for mentioning that domestic violence can happen to someone regardless of where they grew up, their age, gender, nationality, what their economic circumstances are. And I would say in my career, the majority of the very violent cases that we've seen came from really well-to-do families. So that is a myth that, it only happens to poor people or people who are uneducated. It happens to everyone. And the root cause of domestic violence is simple. It's power and control. It's just one person wanting to have that control over someone else, and to do that in various ways. And I think we're going to talk about what ways, what forms domestic violence appears in later on. But that's basically what it boils down to in the context of a relationship, one person wanting to have control over the other.
I'd like to add to that. I believe that's the overarching theme, is power and control. And I want everyone who's listening to please write this down. One of the things that we do to take advantage of people by demanding power and control is the lack of permission and the lack of consent. When permission and consent are not present, that's what was just mentioned, that power and control. When you don't ask for permission, that is the unfamiliar and the violation of the power structure, right? When people are empowered, you usually are asking for consent, asking for permission. Is it okay? And you're more considerate, right? When we stop being considerate and we're just implying on things and just overpowering people without them even having a viewpoint or having their input, that's where the violence is starting. Because when they're no longer relevant, it's easier to dehumanize someone like that, right? And we talk about dehumanization quite a bit. And what a lot of people like to do in order to power over people, they like to remove the humanity out the way. They say, oh, okay, you really don't matter, or you didn't feel this, or get over it. You don't have a human emotion. You don't have a human response. And they just start manipulating the entire scenario. Where a lot of times when you're just silent on it and when you don't have a voice, unfortunately, abusers take silence as a co-signing, meaning I agree, right? And if we even see this in our businesses, sometimes when we click on, we agree sometimes on our cell phones with an update, or we agree with the new rules or regulations or things of that nature. They're literally at least asking, even if they're not totally upfront with the new rules or regulations, they're at least giving you that option to say, I agree. Domestic violence is you don't even have the option to give your point of view or to give permission or to give consent.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I like what you said about really in relationship, what is important is permission and consent. And the opposite of permission and consent is power and control. I like that very much.
That's it.
Would you talk about, maybe start with Vanessa again, about the different forms of domestic violence? I understand that earlier you also said like physical violence, and I know that physical violence is one aspect of domestic violence, but what other ways can domestic violence happen?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so physical violence, that's what comes to mind for most people, right? When you hear domestic violence, you think of bruises, black eyes, but it's so much more than that. Domestic violence can also come in the form of emotional abuse, calling names, isolating, acting jealous, humiliating your partner in public. There's also psychological abuse where you have the fear that something could happen. It could be making you stay awake for long hours so that you're exhausted, forcing your children to engage in verbal abuse towards you as well. We see a lot of monitoring through technology, monitoring where a person is at all times, stalking. It can also show up in economic abuse, and very frequently economic abuse happens, and that's something that isn't really talked about as much. But it's preventing or keeping someone from getting a job, or if they have a job, it's trying to sabotage that so that they lose their job. It could also look like being there and demanding the paychecks on payday. Lots of different ways that you can withholding money when it's time to pay bills or even purchase food and basic necessities for the household. Those are different ways that economic abuse can happen. Then there's also sexual abuse, which is forcing acts or harming during sex, making people dress a certain way that they're not comfortable doing. So it is more than just a physical, and it's mainly, all the behaviors that intimidate or manipulate or serve to isolate, terrorize the other person in the relationship.
Thank you. Dr. Pugh, would you speak a little bit about what are some of the barriers that would prevent a victim from seeking support or trying to leave the abusive situation?
I got you. So anytime when we're dealing with manipulation, it's almost how you can control someone's life narrative or their scenario without them even being a part of it. So I'll give you an example. How many of us, and I just ask these rhetorical questions, people don't have to answer, how many of us know the lyrics to a song we don't even like? Pretty much all of us, right? And the reason why we know the lyrics of a song that we don't like is because the songs that we don't like get repeated the most. So that's how it's not even our song, but when it comes on, we can go with the flow with it, right? Unfortunately, when the abuse has been repeated so long, it has become normal when it's not. And that's one of the biggest barriers, not even knowing when I'm supposed to ask for help because I'm so used to it. It's the same lyrics that I've been hearing since I was 2 and 3 years old. Now I'm 43 years old. And why should I ask for help when I've been experiencing it my whole life? If it hasn't killed me yet, it must be divine intervention. I mean, so many people have drawn conclusions just because it's being repeated. And what I'm asking people to do now is just because it's repeated doesn't mean it's natural or normal. It's just your reality. And I hope people understand that. Just because it's your reality doesn't mean it has to be accepted. It must be addressed. And sometimes we just don't know. I'm finding out now more than ever, and which makes me much more patient, is I have to realize, and this is extremely uncomfortable. Some people just don't know what it looks like to ask for help. And I'm finding out a lot of my good-hearted people, for some strange reason, not strange reason, I kind of know what it is. A lot of good-hearted people are good-hearted people because they have been abused. And what they're doing is being a good-hearted person out of safety. It doesn't mean that they don't want to be good genuinely, but a huge part of that is because a lot of people want to be good people to keep the conflict down and then make sure that they're liked and accepted so they won't be abused. And so now, if they can just be a good-hearted person, not say anything, because a lot of people just don't even want to, I don't want anybody to think this. I know I deal with a lot of senior citizens, and one culture shock that I've had is that they have a really like a. I want to be very specific with my word. They have infatuation with how people think about them, and this is not to poke fun or just highlight people in an imbalanced way. But one of the things that I'm finding out is that a lot of people who are senior citizens or elders, they did not have the avenues of technology to reach out for help. It was just survive. And unfortunately, that survival technique has been repeated without transparency. And it's not a fault of theirs, it's just their reality. So people have taught their children how to survive certain things because they may not have had the resources to literally get their voices out. So I don't like using generational curses all the time, but I will say we have generational habits that we don't even know how to talk about. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we really, really need to at least discuss. What are some things that we have passed down throughout our generations that we've never discussed? Because traditions that are not understood can end up being barriers in our own families.
That's right. What you said made me remember this time several years ago, where I used to go out and do monitoring of domestic violence, education program for perpetrators. So just a quick background is that if in Georgia you are charged with the crime of domestic violence, then you are then also required to go to a 24-week intervention class called Family Violence Intervention Program, where it's an educational class where you sit with a group of other men or same gender groups and learn new ways to behave. And so I used to go out and monitor these programs. And one thing that I heard that I connected with what you said is one person said, well, if it worked for my dad, why shouldn't it work for me? And so I wanted to bring that up. Vanessa, would you add any other things about what are some of the barriers that prevents victims from seeking help?
Yes, definitely. So one of the main barriers that prevent people from seeking help is the abuser themselves. Leaving a relationship that's abusive is one of the most dangerous times for a victim. The risk of being killed or hurt critically increases when someone makes plans to leave, or even just a couple of months after they have already left. If you listen to the news and you hear things about someone killed their partner or their ex, you always hear the words ex or estranged. You listen carefully the next time you hear that, you will always hear those two words. And that means that the person took those steps to leave and to try to get to safety. And because that control was lost, the partner ended up killing them, unfortunately. Finances are also a huge barrier to leaving a relationship. How many of us in this room or on this call right now can leave, walk out the door wherever you're located right now with what is on you, what's on your person, and start your life all over again? And that's what a lot of survivors of domestic violence are faced with having to do when they escape, to achieve safety. Affordable housing is a barrier. Just being able to have accessible resources and starting your life all over again, especially if you have children. It just compounds a situation where are you going to live? How are you going to take care of them, especially if you were a two-income household, or if you depended on your partner to bring in, the finances to take care of the family. So finances are a huge barrier as well. And there are many more. If you're an immigrant, fear of deportation, not having documents, maybe they were taken away by the abusive partner. There's just so many barriers that immigrants and regular survivors who are citizens here face.
And I'll add a couple more barriers from just my knowledge too, is pets is another barrier, right? Like pets and children, abusers use them as, pawns to keep the victim in place. And then the other one, more specific to the LGBT or transgender community, is that sometimes abusers can mess with or prevent the victim from taking their hormone. If they're on hormone replacement, that is one of the things that they do. And also the fear of outing the victim to their friends and family members. So that's another barrier. The next set of questions that I have is it connects QCC's work with domestic violence. But before I jump into that, I wanted to ask, what are some resources that are available for victims in the community, and where can they call? Who can they reach out to?
So there is help available. That's the good news. If you're in a domestic violence situation, you can reach, there's a 1-800 statewide hotline number. It's 1-800-33-HAVEN. That's free and confidential and can be accessed 24/7. I know sometimes people may not be able to make these phone calls during the day, but because their abuser may be there or they don't want to talk in front of their kids, but it's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can call that number and they will connect you to whatever resources you may need. If you need a safe place to stay, there are 46, in Georgia, there are 46 certified domestic violence shelters that they can connect you to, that will also accept your children if you have them. If they don't have space in your immediate county, they'll find you somewhere that has space. And if shelter is not something that you need, maybe you need a family violence protective order. They can also help you with legal advocacy, and that this is all free of service, who can help you fill out the paperwork and the petition that you might need in order to keep your abuser away from you, away from your kids. It can also order child support relief sometimes. And if you're working and afraid of your abuser coming on the job, it can also order your abuser from coming to your workplace. There's also counseling that's available. A lot of times it really helps to be able to talk about the things that you're going through with someone. And then there's also help with food, any advocacy resources that you need on behalf of your children or yourself. Domestic violence programs are a wealth of resources, all free of charge, and you can access them by calling that 1-800 number or by going on the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence website and selecting the Find Help option.
Thank you so much. Okay, so what I'm going to do from this point onwards, Vanessa, is these are questions that we have received from the folks who are on the call, and a lot of them are either caretakers as parents or are caretakers as childcare providers. And so you can see the scenario that I'm about to read, but I'm going to read it to you anyway. And if you and Dr. Pugh would take turns responding to that. So the question is, I have a student in my class who shows signs of anxiety and distress in the classroom. How can I approach this situation to identify if these behaviors are related to domestic violence? What supportive measures can I provide for this child? Vanessa, would you respond to that?
I can
Yeah.
definitely respond to that. So what you can do if you have a child that shows signs of anxiety and distress, there are several characteristics. Children who have, they're often the silent victims of domestic violence, and they have different effects of exposure, just depending on their individual characteristics and the level of trauma that they've experienced. So for purposes of this discussion, if we're dealing with infants and preschool age, especially, there's several behavioral things that you may want to identify. One for infants is being fussy, trouble sleeping, having decreased responsiveness. And in a preschool age, they may have aggression, behavior problems, irritability, trouble sleeping. So once you are, oh, sorry, the question changed.
No,
So
keep going.
once you, what supportive measure, you can have yourself be a source of open communication for the child. You can build trust. You can let them know that they can come and talk to you without judgment. And you can be just listen, take the time to listen. A lot of times kids who witness domestic violence, they are confused, they're anxious, they don't know what's going on. They're not sure who to trust outside of their household. They're afraid of talking to someone. They don't want to get either parent in trouble because they love both parents or both of their caregivers, whoever is perpetrating the violence at home. And so being a listening support to them is one of the best things that you can do. And just educating yourself on the signs to watch out for.
Dr. Pugh, would you add anything to this in terms of what a childcare provider or an outsider adult may do to support the child who they assume is experiencing domestic violence at home?
One of the things that has helped me out in the past is that I need to be very careful of doing what I want to do in that scenario. I've had a young student who was a victim of domestic violence after a date she went out with someone. And when they told me about it, my emotional response went into protective mode, but then that protective mode may violate a permission. She may not want me to be in that protective mode. So one of the things that I did learn in that scenario was if someone who has just been violated without permission, the first step I need to do is ask for permission. I have to respect the person. I have to get permission. I have to get consent. Anything outside of that makes a lot of things worse. So instead of what I want to do in that scenario, I have to get permission, I have to get consent, I have to give respect, and I have to be very, very quiet. One of the things I try to not do is cheer people up in a traumatic experience. And unfortunately, we see this on a lot of entertainment. We see this on movies. We even see this in reality shows. When people are hysterically crying because of some type of traumatic event, a lot of people are talking to them at the same time. They're trying to process what just happened and trying to process new voices. And so what I found out is that being present and respectful is better than giving a pep talk and giving them resources that make me feel better about my job, right? And it's very difficult to do because a lot of us want to serve people who are hurting. And one of the things that I really want people to challenge themselves on, I have to challenge myself every day, is there are going to be some times when you have to let people process the suffering. And that is not fair to anyone because most of us don't like watching people hurt, right? I'm not saying enjoy it, but we have to be so attentive that we're not we don't have to be in control. We do have to pay attention. That's one of the things that I had to struggle with a lot in my career, because I want to control the safety. If you're not safe, I want to control the safety. I want to establish safety. I want to make sure I'm doing my job. I want to make sure no one's hurting you. But then I found out that I'm violating their safety by doing something I want to do without their permission. So it's
true.
very difficult. It's extremely difficult, and I want people to just try your best to listen, learn. But I will end it with this: be clear with the intent. I had to look at the student and say, I am not a threat. I don't know what I look like to you right now. I don't know if I look like the perpetrator or not, but I need you to hear me. I'm not going to force you to do anything you don't want to do, and I'm not a threat. And I had to keep saying what I was doing so they didn't have to wonder what I was doing. All right, next, I'm going to get you something. I'm going to get you a blanket because you're cold. I'm not trying to make you do anything you don't want to do, but I don't want you cold. Now I'm explaining all of my moves. So that has helped me in the past.
Appreciate it so much. So the next question that is, would you go to the last slide, please? Yes. I'm sorry, the slide number 10 is what I'm looking for. Because it was a related question, right? So now as a childcare provider or a community person, you realize something is going on. So my question now is how can I reach out to agencies and support systems to ensure that safety and protection of both the parent and child? And Vanessa, when you respond to this, if you would speak to what advocates do around safety planning.
Oh, yes. Yeah, sure. So I also want to say, if you believe that a parent is the victim of ongoing domestic violence, it may be dangerous to reach out to other agencies and disclose that without first talking to the survivor. We want to make sure domestic violence is about power and control, right? So we want to make sure that we're not removing the control from the survivor, from that parent, of what is going to happen in her situation, his or her situation. So we want to make sure that whatever you plan to do, as Dr. Pugh put in his last comments, we want to make sure that we get permission to do that, and that we help the survivor when he or she is ready to get that help. Because as we mentioned before, the most dangerous time for a survivor is when they are making steps to leave. And so we don't want to inadvertently create more danger for that parent by now all of a sudden putting other agencies and getting other people involved without her being able to control that situation. The parent is the expert in that situation on the violence that is happening in her or his life. And we want to honor that and give her full autonomy in what happens, in her situation. So when we reach out to agencies, agencies are a wonderful resource. If the parent is willing for you to reach out on her behalf or reach out with her to a domestic violence agency, what they will do mainly is safety planning. That is the main focus. We want to make sure that the parent and the child are both safe. Their safety and well-being are foremost in everything that we do. And so they will actually put together a plan with the parent on how they can leave if they feel it's safe to leave, because sometimes it's not. If they choose to stay in the situation temporarily, how to remain safe while they are in that situation, and just different things that they can do. If they do decide to leave, things that they need to take with them. They go through a really extensive plan, and it's custom made to each individual that reaches out. So it's not just a piece of paper with a plan written on it that's handed out and say, hey, you can follow this. They really take the time to listen to the needs of the parent, the needs of the survivor, and find out what's going on in their life, what are the various nuances of their circumstances, and tailor make the safety plan to fit their needs.
I agree 110%. One of the things that has helped in the past is removing the two statements, no one told me and I didn't know. So what I try to do is make sure they understand all resources, all scenarios. So when they're putting themselves in an educated a frame of mind after they're out of their emotional state, because one of the things I'm finding out is anytime when you're trying to educate during the emotional state, frustration can skyrocket, right? So it takes a lot of patience, and you let them know, hey, I have resources for you when you are ready. When I keep having to put it in context, when you're ready, I have the resources for you. Are you in the mind state to get these resources down? You let me know when you're ready. You tell me when to start, type things. Like it's constantly giving them the keys back in their life when they've been taking it away, right? Also, too, just letting them to know, just like what Vanessa just finished saying, the benefits and consequences of each step. So anytime when they're getting a strategy or a plan or a map, they need to know exactly what they're getting into at each and every step, right? So, and I try to make sure I don't give a whole bunch of hope and a whole bunch of gloom and doom. I just give consequences and benefits. That's what I do. Possible consequences, possible benefits. These are the steps that have been laid out in front of you. This is what people have done in the past, but I'm very, very adamant about what I cannot guarantee because right now, unfortunately, when people are hurting, we want to say things that make them feel better, like everything will be all right. And I've had to check myself on many occasions. If I don't know everything will be all right, I have to hold that statement to myself, right? I will tell you, hey, these resources are proven to help many people. And to maximize these resources, we have to do them in a certain way when you're ready to follow these specific instructions. So,
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is when a student's academic performance is deteriorating due to the stress of domestic violence at home, what strategies can educators implement to support the child's education needs while considering their emotional well-being? What would you say to that? Dr. Pugh, would you like to take this first?
sure. I can take this first. I'll let people know that as a young child, I was a peer mediator in elementary, middle, and high school. I don't even know how I got into that work, but here I was. I was blessed to have parents who had a lot of arguments, a lot of discussions, heated discussions, and I was forced in a position where I had to mediate both sides, right? Unfortunately, that emotional stress followed me to the school system where I was a high performing student, but I would have not necessarily emotional outbursts, but I would get really still to the point where I wouldn't even talk. To the point because I was constantly trying to gear up what I would have to go through when I get back home. Had a counselor, and she did something for me that I did not even understand what she was doing at the time, but it was so critical. She allowed me to have a space and a time to process what I was going through at home. She didn't even talk. She said, I need you to sit here. If you got to cry, I need you to do it. If you have to scream, I need you to do it because you may not have the opportunity to get this out because you're paying so much attention when you get home. A lot of our children, especially students now in so many different levels of academia, they are raising their parents, specifically if the parents are not mature enough to communicate through conflict, right? So you have a lot of kids now who are developing skill sets that make them mature in certain realms of their life. So now they're at home, they're an adult, they're really taking care of the parents, they're putting them on both sides of the home, going through different team building exercises. I'm talking about they're very creative. And unfortunately, we are putting our children and our young people in adult spaces. And then when they come to school, we're expecting them to be back in a child space. And that is a lot of confusion. So when you are not understanding what realm you're allowed to be in control, you will be sometimes you lash out. And if you are faced with life or death situations at home, you don't see the use of academic progress because somebody's going may die or somebody may be hurt. So how is a good grade going to protect my mom or protect my little sister or protect my father, right? So my counselor allowed me to have a space where I could process the information without looking weird to my peers. Or she also went to teachers and they said, hey, If he's not paying attention, it's not him being disrespectful. If he's lashing out, if he's just giggling out loud or laughing out loud, some people laugh to keep from crying. So a lot of class clowns or a lot of class entertainers, what I like to call them, because some entertainers, they're extremely intelligent. They're just trying to keep the attention off of them as much as humanly possible by getting all the attention. And it's a very strange thing, but I was blessed with a teacher that allowed some of us to crack jokes at the beginning of class so we can get it out, so we could learn. So if we have any teachers or educators or people who control classroom and academic spaces, if you allow artistic expression to be a part of the curriculum, it will help them balance out, even if it can't solve problems, it will help them cope with it and strategize for the problem, even if it can't solve them. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think the next question I will pass on to Vanessa is, and sorry team, I'm gonna give her slide number 9, so my apologies for messing with you. So the question is, in a former relationship, I experienced domestic abuse and my biological child witnessed it. I'm now in a healthier relationship, which includes my 2 stepchildren and my biological child. I've observed my child displaying aggressive actions towards the younger step siblings. How can I manage and address this behavior while ensuring the safety and well-being of all of my children?
That's a great question. So domestic violence is a cycle. So children who have witnessed domestic violence in the home, they're more at risk of becoming abusive themselves and taking on those tendencies. And so if you observe one of your children displaying aggressive actions, one of the best things that you can do is get them into some type of counseling that's age appropriate. Evidence-based therapy would be the best for helping that child to cope with the things that they witnessed, and cope with the things that all of the feelings that they have experienced. Witnessing domestic violence is trauma. And so a lot of times they think that's normal. They think that it's okay to act out that way. And so the earlier that we can help our children, especially when they're young, cope with this and retrain them into, no, this is not appropriate. There's another way to handle things. The better for them in the long run, so that they don't grow up and become themselves an abusive partner.
I can just add something. Oh, you about to move on? Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, no, go ahead, Dr. Pugh.
Okay, just very briefly, one of the things that children pay attention to is the lack of consequences if someone has been the perpetrator. So what happens is we have to really educate them. Just because that person's not in jail doesn't mean the consequences don't exist. So they may internalize, okay, that person did it and they're still functional in society. We're safe, but nothing happened to that person. So sometimes they internalize it, well, if nothing happens, that means it may be okay. So sometimes we just have to take that extra time explaining. Just because you didn't see the consequences doesn't mean they don't exist. Yeah.
Thank you. So the next question is, a child witnesses domestic violence at home, but has not disclosed it to anyone. How can educators and caregivers create an environment where the child feels safe enough to share their experience? And what steps should be taken to ensure the child's well-being? Vanessa, I'll pass it to you, and then Dr. Pugh can jump in.
Yeah, sure. I can touch briefly on this. I think educators and caregivers play a really important role. Domestic violence is can be such a social stigma and a taboo subject that's not often talked about. Having a type of environment in which you're talking to kids and teaching about healthy relationships, what's appropriate, what's not. I would create that safe space for them to know it's okay to talk about the subject first and foremost. And it'll even open the door once they hear it often enough and they feel engaged and they know it's not something they'll get in trouble for talking about, they may open up and let you know what's going on in their own homes. So what steps should be taken to ensure their well-being? Again, listening is very key. Being consistent in how you show up, providing a space where they feel comfortable to share with you, and then connecting them again, utilizing those resources that are available to you so that it doesn't all fall on your shoulders to take care of. Utilizing the guidance counselors, utilizing even, talking to the parent at certain times. If the child is disclosing that the parent is going through something, you can try in a safe way without the other partner knowing, to try to get the parent in to your office to talk about something that's not related to what the child disclosed, and see if maybe he or she will open up to having any needs related to domestic violence.
I'll briefly tag along with that. One thing that I am seeing in a lot of school systems with students who are witnessing so much, they have so many adults depending on them, where if you have adults depending on you, your trust level of adults go down. So that's the reason why a lot of students don't even talk to adults, because they have so many adults depending on them to be the most mature, level-headed, most able to communicate effectively. We have so many kids now who are having attendance issues because they're babysitting their younger siblings, right? So it's a trust issue that I'm seeing across the board. But I will let everyone know this. We have a lot of students right now, a lot of kids, but a lot of people, but specifically young people who have this thing where they say, I don't want to snitch. I don't want to be a snitch. I don't snitch. I don't tell on anyone. I don't do any of this, right? So I had to bring up a scenario that actually made sense, even if it didn't change their minds. I had to make them think about what they were saying instead of change what they were doing, right? So I said, all right, if you see a fire in your home, would you just sit there and look at the fire because you don't want to snitch on the fire? Or would you call the fire department? And they look at me, they're like, whoa, no, I'm definitely calling the fire department. I said, okay. So when something is about to burn something that's extremely important in your life to the ground, it's not snitching if you're trying to preserve something that's worth it, right? And then now they're starting to think about it. I said, I understand that abusers use this word snitch because now they're not only using physical force, but they're using a social force. You don't want to be ridiculed. You don't want to be banned from this friendship or this family or things of that nature, right? So I try to tell them all the time, I understand y'all have heard this whole word snitching a lot, but think about your house being on fire. How important is it to be accepted by the flame? And I'll end with that.
Thank you. I think what I also want to say, especially to the people who are educators on this call, early education providers, the fact that these children are spending 8 to 10 hours in your care, you are already providing them a reprieve from the stressful environment that is home for them, right? And then the things that you teach them there, right? Like when you work with them, you work with them at this level of respect, right? Like I have a kid and I've been in early education spaces and we do early education work. So I know the training that you have as educators to speak to them in the most respectful way. You demonstrate and you act out for them how a respectful relationship and a give and take and a respecting and permission and consent works, right? In the way you teach them how to play, how to, when you focus on social emotional learning, cognitive learning, when you are focusing on what is curriculum, right? You're already giving them what you can, which would impact them in a positive way. So even as you're learning about this issue and how to address it, I want you all to know that you as community members are already making an impact and continue to do the good work that you do, right? It's not something additional you have to do. If you do the work that you do, you're already making a difference in the lives of these kids. I think I want to stop here with the prepared questions and conversation. And I'm gonna pass this over to Jabril to share with us some questions that came up, and Vanessa and Dr. Pugh, feel free to answer to whichever question that you want to. But before we do that, I really want to encourage all the participants to take our survey. We need your feedback to figure out what other topics you're interested in. So please take the survey. We're also dropping a link in the chat, and then there's a QR code on your screen for that. I think that's that. Jabril, you want to take over?
Yes, thank you so much. You did really great today. So due to time, we're only going to ask one live question, but I'm also going to make a request as well. But the question we're going to ask is, how is it best to report someone who is an immigrant and is in a domestic violence situation without them knowing they're being reported? And if you could also drop some resources that parents or friends or caregivers can report to in the chat as well, that'll be really helpful.
Could you repeat
I
the
will,
question? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So the question is, how is it best to report someone who is an immigrant and is in a domestic violence situation without knowing they're being reported?
I can start, Dr. Pugh. Without having more context for the question, understanding that they're wanting to report that domestic violence is taking place where the immigrant is a survivor.
Correct.
Okay. So again, want to go back to giving autonomy to survivors and not calling on interventions without first talking to them and making sure that they have control over what happens in their lives. So I would pull that immigrant survivor aside, first of all, to find out if she needs help. Listen to what's going on, listen to what he or she is saying as a survivor, and letting them know it's not their fault. Finding out if they would like you to connect them with resources. Reporting brings along a law enforcement connotation. And that's one thing that is a barrier to immigrant survivors if they're not documented, is a fear of deportation. So you don't want to inadvertently make her situation worse by trying to get her help. So instead, talking to that survivor, finding out what her needs are, what she does and doesn't want to do, and how you can best support her or him in that situation.
I agree 100%. I would educate myself on the benefits and consequences of helping someone with the immigrant status. And then not only educating myself, but educating the person that I'm trying to help. So we both know how to respect the autonomy piece. But yeah, so I agree 110%. It's just very hard to help someone if you don't know what their help, the type of help you're going to give, what is it going to do to them? And that's very, very difficult, but it's
Jabril, is there any other question?
That's the time for today, but
Okay.
yeah.
thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, before we close out, I would really want to thank both of our panelists, Vanessa and Dr. Pugh, for their time and their resources. I think my takeaway, and I'm going to briefly summarize it, is that in order for us to address domestic violence, which is one person has power over somebody else, and they use that power to control the victims. The flip side of it, as Dr. Pugh put it so well, is getting permission and consent. So permission and consent, let's keep that as our key. And as community members, as we experience these situations, let's remember that whatever intervention you want to do, whatever help you want to offer, please make sure that you have permission and consent from the person before you do it for them. And then again, as Vanessa put it, it is about increasing their autonomy, their voice, and their own agency. So I thank you for your participation. Please be sure to fill out the survey. And then on the screen, you also saw our resources for early childcare resources that we talked about before. At this time, I also want to thank our sponsor, Carter's, for their continued support. And now for a brief second, I'm going to put my development director hat on, and I want to say that this kind of webinars, this kind of resources are not possible without support, donations, and contributions from individuals like you. So if you have enjoyed our webinar today, please consider donating to QCC so that we can continue to bring this kind of resources to parents throughout the state of Georgia. Thank you so much for your time, and have a good day. Have a good rest of your day.